From The Times and The Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Luke Jones.
Hi. Come in, Emily.
Elly,
Well done for finding us.
Yeah, I've gone around in a circle. So I went up to Northumberland last month to meet a lady called Elly Chapple as part of an investigation into families who were falsely accused of a rare kind of child abuse called fabricated and induced illness.
Sunday Times special correspondent Emily Dugan has been investigating social care for over a decade.
And it was a lovely sunny day. In lots of ways, it looked like a completely idyllic place to live and a lovely family living there who one would never imagine that they had had to contend with something like this. All right, so I guess if we go back to the very beginning, can you tell me about your daughter, Ella?
When she was born, there was a lot of noise just in sort of the delivery space because she wasn't obviously doing what was needed when she first arrived.
Elly Chapple's daughter, Ella, was born in 2006 with a rare genetic syndrome called Wagger syndrome, which caused very complex disabilities.
In our community, they're known as zebras because they're all perfectly unique human beings, each and every one of them.
If we skip forward a bit, can you tell me what happened in 2020 that started to change things for you?
She was unwell. She'd not been herself. She was very tired. She had a sore throat, gunky eyes. Something wasn't right.
Right at the start of the pandemic, Ella got pneumonia and had to be rushed to hospital.
It progressed really fast, really fast.
And how unwell was she then? Was she not conscious at that time?
She was intubated. She was in intensive care.
And, her parents, Elly and James, stayed with Ella in hospital.
We were just there every day, night and day, all night, willing her through.
You must have been terrified.
Yeah, we were. We were absolutely terrified. We thought we were going to lose her. And then on the day of discharge, we're getting ready to go home and I get this phone call out of nowhere.
Social services called her and they said that she wasn't going to be allowed to go home with Ella.
You can't go home. We're going to take you to court and, we're concerned about your care of your child. And I couldn't even, understand what was being said to me. I completely froze.
She went into a state of shock. I think it's fair to say she was utterly distraught.
It made me feel like the worst human being on the planet.
In a new investigation for the Sunday Times, Emily reports that despite fabricated or induced illness, FII, being incredibly rare, hundreds of parents have been accused of it, resulting in not just stress and trauma, but also families torn apart. Could guidelines from the body representing paediatricians be to blame? The story today. The parents falsely accused of harming their own children. Emily, you've been telling us about this mother and daughter, Elly and Ella, and this incredible ordeal that they've had to go through. When did you first hear about their story?
Back in 2021, I investigated parents whose newborn babies were taken away after one unexplained bruise was found on them. And after that investigation, I stayed in touch with an academic who'd done a lot of research in this area, and he started telling me about all these families who were getting accused of this rare kind of child abuse. And through him, I heard about Elly Chapple and her real fight to get justice for her daughter.
And the child abuse that she was being accused of is what exactly?
So it's called fabricated or induced illness, or FII. It's where parents exaggerate or cause their children's symptoms. And we used to know it by the name Munchausen's by proxy.
Yes.
Or that's rather the kind of medical term. It's this idea of children being deliberately harmed by their parents to create the impression that they're ill when they're not. This phenomenon of parents exaggerating or causing their children's symptoms, obviously it was a particularly well-known case recently of Gypsy Rose Blanchard in America. And in that case, she was unnecessarily made to use a wheelchair, fed through a tube, and it caused a devastating impact on her life. Her whole childhood was spent in a wheelchair when it needn't have been. And that's what social services are very frightened of. The problem is, these cases are incredibly rare. And a lot of guidelines that have been issued make it seem like it's something far more common than it is. One thing that all of the families I've spoken to, and not all of them I've been able to include in my reporting, but the thing they all have in common is a really deep trauma. It is impossible to imagine being concerned about your child's health, not being able to find answers sometimes, or just desperately seeking the best treatment, and then being accused of abusing your child. And not only that, potentially being separated from them, or just living in fear of being separated from them. The impact that has on families is huge.
Elly's daughter, Ella, as you explained, has some quite complex needs. I mean, what exactly are those?
She's got a rare genetic condition called Wagger syndrome, and it causes quite a lot of different symptoms, among them childhood kidney cancer, which she recovered from, but also problems with communication and mobility. And she's deaf and blind as well. So there's a lot going on there. And that, of course, meant that the family had a lot of interaction with social services.
There were times when I had to push really hard for the things she needed, and I probably came across as a very challenging individual.
Elly's the kind of person who doesn't take no for an answer. She was a businesswoman and she gave up her work to look after Ella and her 2 other children. And also, she created this kind of bespoke team of care around Ella that was remarkable. And they all had specialist knowledge of how to communicate with a child who's deaf-blind. And it was all working pretty well. It didn't come cheap. It was costing the council more than £100,000 to deliver this care at home. So the cost of Ella's care put the family at times at loggerheads with the council. They were really pushing for something that was different to what some other children were getting. But that was because Ella had an incredibly rare condition with all kinds of different needs that needed to be met.
And just thinking practically for a moment, what did that mean? You said they had ways of communicating with her because she is deaf-blind. I mean, how on earth do you even do that?
There's a special kind of sign language where you're actually touching the person's hands. It's absolutely amazing because it also has this quite calming effect. It must be utterly disconcerting not to be able to see or hear properly. And so to have someone touch your hand at the same time as they're communicating something, I think was amazing for her.
And pre all these problems, was the mother Elly, broadly, I don't know if happy is the right word, but sort of content with this setup? It was working?
It was working really well, and Ella was doing really well. Right up until the incident in 2020, which we spoke about earlier, when Ella got really ill. So Ella was so unwell in hospital. She was in intensive care. In total, spent 6 weeks there. And there were moments where I think they thought they might lose her. And then it finally comes to this day in April 2020, where Elly and James think, brilliant, we are going to take our daughter home and that's it. This horrible ordeal is all over. But in fact, a new horror was unfolding for them. Elly's told, sure, you can go home and get a bag, but you're not going home with your daughter. Elly told me after this phone call that she went back to Ella's room where she was being looked after by an intervener, which is what she calls Ella's specialist care staff.
I thought I told the intervener with Ella, can't go home, I've got to go and, I thought I'd done this rational explanation. She explained to me many years later, it's not what happened at all. I went back into the room and I fell to the floor and I crawled my way to the toilet and I threw up. I was just utterly broken. Didn't know what to do, didn't know how to do anything. Didn't know how to explain it to Ella.
Gosh. Why was that happening necessarily? What were the red flags that made medical staff think there's something untoward going on?
Well, there were a few different allegations. Initially, there was a child protection investigation because Ella had been brought to hospital when she was already very unwell. And so there were questions about should she have been brought there sooner, given that she was having breathing problems. But that was dismissed because actually the parents had sought advice from doctors before they'd gone to hospital and nobody had said rush her there. But also because it was March 2020. People did not want to go to hospital unless it was serious, and they couldn't tell how serious it was. But then that child protection investigation kind of opened up another can of worms for them. Red flags that potentially signified FII, which included allegations that were ultimately unfounded that she had over-medicated her, but also the way that Elly was constantly pushing for services for Ella inadvertently meant that she was seen as someone who might be fabricating or inducing illness.
So on the day itself, she couldn't actually take her daughter home. She could only go get a bag, as you explained. What about going forward? I mean, when could she next have contact with her daughter?
So after that, she went to her parents' house and she took her 2 younger children there, while her husband James took Ella home and carers there helped him at home. But in the meantime, it was more than 2 weeks before she was even allowed a couple of hours supervised time with her own daughter in her own home.
Supervised with some external person?
Carers there, yeah. How did that make you feel?
Like your heart's being cut out. It's absolutely horrific. You've got absolutely no power to protect. I'd spent my life defending Ella's rights and who she was, and I had literally had my hands ripped off the steering wheel completely, and I was not allowed to do anything, and it was incredibly painful, and I couldn't understand what I'd done. I just thought, what on earth have I done for this to happen?
James was trying to keep his business afloat at the time. He ran a property business, and he was having to be in court all the time, having to prepare, just fighting to try and get the family back together. And his business went under at the time.
I was in court, I was on the phone. Some days the care staff couldn't turn up for one reason or another, so I was having to help out, plus being Ella's carer, doing the nights, because I was also doing the night shifts as well, because Ella wouldn't go to sleep.
So what did that mean for Ella then? That must have been difficult for her.
That's one of the saddest things about the long period that they weren't allowed to live under the same roof, is that Ella was really displaying signs of being deeply troubled by what was going on. Ella began to self-harm, and the way that often presented itself was banging her head really hard against objects, to the extent that she got 2 severe black eyes and had to be seen by a doctor. She was signing often to her dad. She was pointing to the wedding ring and communicating married. Could you tell she was missing Elly?
Yeah. I mean, she would ask for mum regularly. She would ask married a lot if I was still married to mum. Why is she leaving? Her biggest thing was Ella, no, that was the biggest thing, that it was all her fault. And this was the thing that really, quite honestly, did wear me down, was seeing her so depressed, so down, and thinking that it was entirely her fault.
At the same time, the carers that had been in place, they were all ripped out and replaced with agency workers who didn't understand best practice for communicating with deafblind children.
You've got people who are incredibly inexperienced, very, very young, making life-changing decisions on something they absolutely don't understand. It's a little bit like somebody getting a Formula One car, having just passed their driver's license. That's basically what we were dealing with.
And also, at the same time, the council were trying to apply for her to be moved into residential care. Fortunately, as this all progressed, the family court asked the council to look again at care being provided at home. And of course, all through this, there are investigations going on and, these allegations aren't being proven.
You said you got onto this story talking to a sort of expert who was researching these and other things. What was their particular line of inquiry with this issue? What did they tell you?
So it's a professor called Andy Bilson at the University of Central Lancashire. And he's been looking into the ways in which the guidelines around detecting FII completely contradict the reality in terms of essentially exaggerating how common this is and how dangerous this is.
My research has shown that there's absolutely no real evidence base for fabricated or induced illness.
He looked at all the serious case reviews between 2010 and 2021. And what he found was that out of all of those serious case reviews, only 4 were substantiated with FII, and there were no deaths. A lot of the justification for the guidelines is that this is something that could easily result in death, the implication being that death is an outcome that might happen quite frequently. And what his research showed is that there were no deaths in England in any of that time.
So if he's suggesting that there's only a few that stand up to scrutiny, and yet accusations are becoming more and more common, the inference is what? That lots of people are being wrongly accused of this?
Yeah, there was some research done by Luke Clements at Leeds University.
It's supposed to be a very rare condition, and yet charities were coming across sufficient numbers to actually issue guidance.
And as part of that research, there was a survey, it was just a snapshot survey of parents that found almost 400 had been accused of fabricating or inducing illness in their children. And that gives you a sense of scale, because if the parents who happened to see that survey were able to respond to it, and that's how many you capture, imagine how many more may be affected.
I think the scale of it is tens of thousands, because if you ever put out a survey on this issue, you get completely overwhelmed. And it's not just us, it's many other organisations involved with disabled children and their families.
Local authorities don't actually collect data on the number of investigations for FII, but we know from research that 74% of English children's services have pursued FII allegations.
Bonkers they don't keep data on this. I mean, the same with a police force, if you investigated somebody for burglary, that would be counted somewhere, but social services don't seem to log their investigations by that kind of category.
That's right. I mean, you would log that it was a safeguarding concern, but it would be helpful to have data at this granular level, because I think then it would enable clinicians and social workers to get a sense of maybe there is an overreaction here or not, if the data doesn't show it. But I strongly suspect from this snapshot survey that you would really see that there is an imbalance here in terms of how many cases are being investigated. And I think what a lot of the academics and in fact the practitioners in this area, including social workers and clinicians, a lot of what they're concerned about is that so many innocent parents are getting dragged into these suspicions. And while missing a case would be utterly catastrophic, because we all know in the very rare cases that this happens, it is a horrific form of child abuse. And I don't want to say that it doesn't happen, because it does.
Yeah.
But the risk here is that you're dragging in far too many innocent parents by saying in the guidelines that the way you can recognise a case is through various signs in children and parents that one could argue are quite common in parents who are anxious about their children's conditions.
Yeah. Why do you think this is happening, and maybe on the rise, if you think it is?
So there are a couple of factors. One is that we have, I think, as a society, become very frightened of risk. I think safeguarding is one of those areas where you might get social workers and clinicians, where you've got two groups of people deciding what happens next. And neither group wants to be the one who says, actually, guys, are we sure this is so dangerous? Are we sure this is what we think is happening? You get a kind of groupthink, I think, sometimes in cases where essentially nobody wants to be the one that misses a case. And so everyone decides it's safer to err on the side of caution. But I also think a big factor is the guidelines around this, which were expanded even further in 2021, which is the year after everything that happened to Elly and Ella.
And just explain those. What are the guidelines for identifying this?
So in 2021, the Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health issued new guidance that included 20 alerting signs in children and parents for behaviour that they say should raise concerns. This includes everything from asking for a second opinion, or not letting a child be seen on their own, or speaking for your child, which of course in cases like Ella's is unavoidable, as well as repeated reporting of new symptoms. It even includes making complaints. The way it's phrased is things like making vexatious complaints. But how does one decide that a complaint is vexatious?
And especially after the introduction of Martha's Law, where people have a right to get a second of opinion, we sort of understand that might just be a usual part of seeking the best health care for your child.
Martha's Rule is named after 13-year-old Martha Mills, who developed sepsis and died even while she was under the care of King's College Hospital. Now, her parents had raised numerous concerns about their daughter's health.
When Martha's rule was introduced, the whole principle behind that was that it would save lives if parents or family members, when a decision is made on critical care relating to their relative, that they can have the right to ask for a second opinion. We already know that that has saved more than 100 lives, that rule. And yet, at the same time, you've got a Royal College giving out guidelines saying that asking for a second opinion is a red flag for child abuse.
That's one thing. What about the complaint side of things? I mean, is that common that the parents would make a complaint, or is that something that, would stick out as being something out of the ordinary?
I mean, again, one of the things that happens is that if you are in a slightly combative relationship, whether that's with social services or with a hospital, it's quite easy to get to a situation where a parent doesn't agree with the treatment or the diagnosis for a child, and all of their behaviour from there on in starts looking like an alerting sign for FII. When in fact it's the behaviour of an anxious parent.
Yeah.
Many of the parents that are investigated for FII in the Leeds University study had actually made a complaint first.
The proportion of families who had made complaints and then were accused was 50% of the whole sample. So that's a pretty statistically significant and very troubling statistic.
So they'd made a complaint against their school or social services or health services, and then they start being investigated. And so what Luke Clements, the researcher, says is that this idea of retaliation, of almost victimisation, is a really strong one. The other thing that seems to be happening is that parents and children who are neurodiverse are getting really swept up in this. Autistic parents are 3 times more likely to be accused of FII than those who don't have autism. And that's according to research by the Association of Directors of Adult Social Services. They found last year that 1 in 6 parents with autistic children had been accused of fabricating illness. So it's one thing being accused of this rare form of child abuse, but it's quite another to fight against the system once you're in that child protection investigation stage. It is an almighty battle to get access to your child back.
Emily, it's an amazing story that you've reported on what has been happening to Elly, the mother, and Ella, her daughter, and how they managed to get through to the other side.
Nice to meet you, Ella.
Sorry, it's no need to be embarrassed. Emily thinks you're a superstar.
I've been hearing all about you from your mum. So Elly was first stopped from going home with her daughter in April 2020. And it took until the end of October for the family to discharge this interim care order that was preventing her from living with her daughter. And it was in December 2020 that Elly was finally able to return home, just in time for Christmas, once the judge formally granted this permission to the council that they could withdraw the care proceedings.
Has there been much of an improvement to Ella? You said, she was struggling being away from her mum. Was it clear that had resolved itself now she was back with her?
I mean, what was wonderful about meeting Ella was she was full of joy. She was excited about when the toast was going to pop.
You want your dinner in your pot? I know you do.
Is that porridge?
Pot toast. Because we listen for the pot.
Yeah, after the pop, when it pops up. She was clearly very pleased to see her mum, and, I only met her in one afternoon, but she seemed like a very happy young woman.
Ella's pretending she's shy. It's not true, though. Else I've never actually seen you do this. It's hilarious.
And that makes it all the more heartbreaking to think of this period that they all went through.
It was 8 months in the end that they were living apart. How did she manage to resolve it?
So it took a long battle through the family court to unpick everything that was happening. Once it got to the family court, my impression is that it became clear it was quite a weak case. But of course, the problem is that the delays in the court and the delays in reports being issued means that even a weak case might take many months to resolve.
What kind of compensation or support after this did Ella get?
Well, Ella's is quite a rare case because it's not often that people get compensation after this happens. But in Elly's case, she was awarded £50,000 compensation when she brought a human rights claim. And actually that claim said that the care proceedings that were brought in this case were unlawful. So it was acknowledging that the council should never have made this intervention. Did you receive an apology from the local authority?
No.
Have you ever?
No.
What do you
I'd
feel
love
about
to know
that?
if somebody... I just thought people would say sorry. I don't harbour ill will or anything, but I think we should be able to do this stuff better. And I think we should be able to say when things don't feel okay, that we can have a conversation about it and that we can talk about really difficult things without all this destruction, and that we can say sorry to one another in the process.
When I went to Northumberland County Council, they said, "We reached agreement on this case in September 2024. We wouldn't wish to comment further."
What Ella and Elly and the rest of the family went through sounds absolutely awful. And you mentioned earlier that there are, potentially lots of other cases like this. From the ones that you've heard of, are they all quite similar?
There are all kinds of awful cases that I've come across researching this article. Many can't speak out at all. One of the features of the family court is that it's very difficult to speak publicly, and Elly's in a rare position because of their successful civil claim that she can. But people have ended up in prison, they've ended up arrested. I've come across a successful assistant head teacher who struggled to find work after his wife and he were accused of FII. And that was just because they were pushing for a diagnosis and better treatment for their child.
Even after they were vindicated?
The problem is, for people who are in professions that work with children or vulnerable people, is that they have to declare if there's been any safeguarding concerns about them. And so nurses, teachers, doctors, anyone in those sorts of professions finds themselves in real professional difficulty when these allegations come up. And I also spoke to a nurse who was initially accused of FII. She had a regular locum job and she lost that because of this safeguarding history, even though her child was then diagnosed with a rare condition and no further action was taken.
You must also have the constant worry that it could happen again. If you're still doing the same things, fighting for your child with the intensity that you ever did, you might worry that, a different agency might see these red flags and take me down the same route again.
Absolutely. And that's one of the clear things that came out of the Leeds University research, is the level of trauma and the knock-on impact that has on children. If you're falsely accused, you would be very reticent to then seek help from social services or doctors for fear that the same thing will happen again.
And the particularly sad thing about this kind of injustice is that it's happening to parents who are already living in quite difficult circumstances, it seems, namely caring for a profoundly unwell child.
Absolutely. It's people at their most vulnerable. And often they may be displaying what seems like slightly abnormal behaviour, right? Because if you're very, very anxious about your child's health, you might be doing all kinds of things that seem a bit surprising.
I wish people would pause and think about it a bit more and just check in and say, what are we actually looking at here? Are we looking at some kind of really challenging, uncooperative, confronting person who's just awful to be around? Or are we looking at a mum who is desperately trying to make sure their child gets what they need?
Parents can be in the worst situation imaginable as these allegations come forward. So they think they're in the worst place ever, and suddenly they find themselves in an even darker place.
Awful. There must be people trying to get on top of this problem and find a fix. Is anyone doing that?
I think the great hope is that the government will take hold of this as an issue. So the volume of families that are now being falsely accused of FII has actually got to the stage where it's so high and the problem is just so intractable that experts got together earlier this year at a place called St George's House, which is basically somewhere where people with disputes try and find a resolution, try and find a way through. And after this meeting, which was attended by social workers and clinicians and researchers, in a final report, St George's House recommended that the government should set out some clear national guidance on how to avoid this sense of moral panic. so that clinicians, social workers and others who might think they're coming across this issue can have a better understanding of how rare it is, so that we're not unnecessarily damaging children and families.
Would they also suggest a change in these guidelines, which seem like a problem?
I think it is absolutely the hope of researchers in this area that the Royal College does look again at these guidelines and does think hard about whether they risk pulling innocent families into this.
You asked the Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health about these concerns about these guidelines. What did they say?
When I contacted them as part of this investigation, they said that the guidance issued in 2021 considered the published evidence available at the time and that they used a multidisciplinary expert working group with extensive consultation. But they did acknowledge that it was due for an update and said that they would consider any new evidence. As part of this, the college also said it was actively exploring options to make sure that it sufficiently captures a multidisciplinary approach.
You spent a long time reporting on this and reporting on so many other issues that affect people. Do you think that this can be turned around?
I think with child protection, people talk about a pendulum effect. So whenever there are high-profile cases in the media of a horrific child abuse case that was missed, there is this reaction. And we saw that in terms of safeguarding investigations. They went through the roof after Baby P, Victoria Climbié. And those are awful, awful cases, and we do need to protect children. But getting the balance right so that families don't end up going through an incredibly traumatic and damaging experience because of allegations that aren't ultimately substantiated enough to trigger it. That's what we've got to look at. It's how do you find that happy medium between protecting children from the harm done by not acting and protecting children from the harm done by overacting?
What about Elly? What does she make of this, having been through it all?
She is desperate to see change, and she's one of those people who will shout from the rooftops until it happens. So I'm sure you'll be hearing more from her as she tries to make that happen.
I've met mothers who've cried their hearts out to me and told me horrific things, way worse than we experienced, and they're silenced. I don't think that's right in this day and age. And it's particularly women, I think. So I don't know why that persists, but I've met many of these brave women, and they deserve to be heard and they deserve to be seen, because this stuff needs to stop. I now train staff and professionals within the NHS, within social care. I walk and work with so many different people, and have done, particularly in the last 5 years, around trauma, which has been really interesting for my own journey. And I publicly speak. People ask me to do things. I see myself as a Mary Poppins, go where I'm needed. When it's done, I'm not. And there's no plan. I'm just following what I feel is right and hoping it makes a difference for other people, really.
That exclusive investigation is from Elly Dugan, special correspondent at The Sunday Times, and you will find plenty more of her work over at thetimes.com. You can read it with a subscription. You might not have been involved in anything like that, but anything remotely similar that you or someone you know or love might want to share with us, you can do by email. thestory@thetimes.com is how to reach us. That is it from us today. The producer was Hannah Varrall, the executive producer was Ed Drummond, and sound design and theme composition was by Maula Sato. I'm Luke Jones. See you soon.